CTV legal analyst Ed Prutschi is back here in studio. He's been following this with us here on CTV News Channel for the past 2 hours or so. Something is interesting as well, and I want to ask you about what Bill Cosby did as a result. And we were listening to that extensive news conference by the attorney in Pennsylvania, who said, you know, yes, Bill Cosby shouted at me. He said some pretty bad things to me and in the court. Maybe now people are starting to realize what he is really like, that this is an actor. He played a role on a TV show. That's a role. That's not the real Bill Cosby. What did you make of that?
It just shows you how ill-advised it is to lose your cool, really at any time, particularly to lose your temper in open court. I mean, that comment is going to come back to haunt Bill Cosby because the prosecutor is going to use it. They've already used it now in their press conference in what really was a lengthy and emotional kind of victory lap, right? An opportunity for the prosecution to let out a lot of emotion with the entire team standing behind him, including Andrea Constand, and kind of, you know, name all of the people who work so hard on trials like this. And boy, I mean, I've sat through some long trials, and whatever side that you're on, you develop a level of camaraderie, and it becomes all-consuming, really. And so you can see that all that being deflated, and then Cosby succumbs to that emotion and responds by shouting out swear words and responds by saying, I'm sick of him, and kind of casting that out at the prosecutor. But everybody's watching when that happens, and especially the judge. The judge who in 60 to 90 days is going to be deciding how much time Cosby, if any, spends in jail. And in particular, in the U.S., one of the things that's going to be critical, there's going to be mitigating or aggravating factor in terms of acceptance of responsibility. Attitude matters, and a display of insight matters. And when the judge has seen that, it's going to be awfully hard for Cosby to be able to play that in a mitigating way.
Right, the notion of sort of contrition, right?
Right.
And realizing the significance and the severity of what has just happened versus sort of lashing out in an arrogant way. And there are those who have criticized Bill Cosby to a certain extent of being his own worst enemy in all of this, because coming across almost as if he didn't really take it seriously. You were saying even this morning, as he was going into that courthouse, he sort of seemed kind of to be in kind of an upbeat, funny mood.
Yeah.
He was sort of making a bit of a joke at one point as he was heading in.
I mean, that's a clip I urge people to watch again, because I think it is a little staggering, and especially in contrast to what we're seeing now. But think back even to the deposition testimony, which was admitted in this trial, not in the first. In the deposition testimony, he was also very flippant. And as he was asked questions, you know, pointed questions that you would think when you're coaching a client, goodness knows if you're spending the kind of money I suspect he spent on his defense, there's some time spent coaching. We bring in lawyers specifically for the purpose of helping you to prepare how to give responses to this, what to expect on cross-examination. And his answers were rambling, and instead of direct and relevant, they kind of were circuitous, and it felt like he was trying to sort of work a comedy routine as he went along, like live in studio, except he was in a deposition room, in a court reporter's room. And that did not work in this trial. He never took the stand, no doubt because his lawyers watched that and saw that and knew he would not be able to testify well.
Well, you raise a great point. This is a man who has been a celebrity for most of his life, really. Very well known, whether it's as a comedian or as an actor. And so perhaps in terms of his own view of himself, his ego, whatever it might have been, never really realizing what exactly was going on here, and that this kind of a guilty verdict was even a possibility.
Yeah, I guess it's a little hard to play closet psychologist and whether this is all about inflated self-worth or whether this is about an actor not being able to divide between, you know, his own role and his own reality. Certainly, you know, again, I've seen this in court where people convince themselves that they're right. They convince themselves of a set of facts that the evidence does not point to.
That's fascinating.
But when they get up on the stand and they're testifying to it, or when they're talking to you, you know, behind closed doors as a lawyer, you're like, wow, he sounds really convinced of that, but I'm going through the evidence, and that's not what it looks like to me as an independent observer, even though it might be my job to present his side of the case. And so you have to have that heart-to-heart with a client and say, look, we got to look at the evidence here. We've got to look at the facts, because what you're telling me and what you seem to honestly believe, it's just not coming out. Now, in a case like this, it is a he said, she said. It's not based on forensic evidence. The reporting was too late in order to have sort of that smoking gun where some CSI officer says, I've taken a blood sample from Andrea Constand, and lo and behold, there's Quaaludes here. That would have been very interesting, of course. But what you do have is you've got deposition testimony that, as I say, comes very close to already admitting the offense. The judge, in his comments during the pretrial motions, when it was determined that this deposition would be admitted, was clearly scratching his head saying, that's bad news. I mean, that is bad evidence, and implied, as the judge said, that the actor, the role, the character that everybody knows and loves is not necessarily the person who's sitting in front of me about to head into a criminal trial.
All right, so that's Cosby, and I want to make sure we take some time to talk about Andrea Constand, born in Toronto, 45 years old, a former basketball player. But you have worked many, many different cases and trials, and we want to be very clear here about what this must have been like for her to go through this, to come forward, to say, yes, you know what, I'm going to pursue this against a man of Bill Cosby's stature, his money, his resources, America's dad, and what that must have been like, the public spotlight, the insults, the character assassination, and give me your sense of that.
There is no way to prepare a complainant for what she has had to go through. There is just no way. And in my practice, I have the opportunity, people come to me and say, you know what, I'm thinking about making a report to police. And it puts me in a very awkward position because while obviously you don't want to encourage somebody to not report, right, to sit back and don't tell anybody what happened. But I think it is my role and it is my job to tell somebody, I want you to understand what happens once you pull the trigger on this, okay? Because you should go into this and make an educated choice and an educated decision because it's going to be difficult. And when I say that, I'm saying that in the context of your standard run-of-the-mill criminal trial, not one that people like us are reporting on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a case that nobody's going to care about except for you and the accused and perhaps a couple of other witnesses or prosecutors, police officers, you know, the kinds that go on in our courts all day, every day. That's still very, very hard. And I think it should be hard. I know people critique me for that, but it should be difficult to come in, give that kind of evidence that could result in somebody going to jail. That should not be easy. It's part of the crucible that gets us at the truth. But in Constand's case, in a situation with this kind of celebrity, with this kind of power, with this kind of money, and with this kind of attention, it's magnified a millionfold. And it's very interesting to watch her because I think people make mistaken assumptions that there's a standard way to emotionally respond to this. I've dealt with hundreds, if not thousands, of both accused and complainants on both sides of the equation. There is no sort of playbook, right? When you watch Andrea Constand and you watch some of the other 5 women who have given statements today after having seen the verdict, we saw 2 or 3 very emotional women who were clearly just sort of overtaken, almost breathless and not able to respond. Constand is cool as a cucumber. And I'm not saying that to suggest that anything she said is wrong. I'm just saying that to contrast how some people respond to the pressure and how other people respond to the pressure.
You raise a great point because, you know, we try to get inside people's minds and we say, well, why isn't she coming out and saying something? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. So people have different ways that they will react. And we saw a lot of emotion, even from the prosecutor himself.
Right.
Very emotional to have gone after Bill Cosby in this way, to finally get to this point. Bill Cosby angry in the court, protesters outside the courthouse protesting as well, some of these women. So it's really a heightened emotional situation for everybody.
And it's that full range of human emotion. I think that's what people have to understand. You know, there's 7 or 8 billion of us, and we're all different, and people will react in different ways. And that's why the prosecutor hinted at what we in Canada call the 3 myths, and we get into much more detail, but he called one of those myths the suggestion that when somebody is assaulted, they will immediately walk over to the police station or make a call, immediately report it, document everything, and show up in court the next day ready to go to trial. Well, yeah, there are people who do that. I mean, I've certainly seen that. There are people who never report, and there's everything in between. And it's very difficult to make any sort of assessment about the truth or falsity of that just because of the time lag. And I'm not suggesting, I definitely am not suggesting believe the victim. That's a hashtag I have a problem with. I don't think you should start from the position of believe the victim. But there are real victims here, and the jury has heard this one and said, we buy it. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, just quickly, what's going to happen now for Bill Cosby? We know they're going to appeal. What does that mean?
So, I mean, first things first, he's got 60 to 90 days. The judge is going to notify both sides what day they're going to come back to court for the sentencing hearing. So there's going to be a lot of work in terms of preparing the various pre-sentence reports that come up there to try to figure out what's the appropriate range, first of all, on this very mathematical score system that the U.S. uses for its sentencing proceedings. And then there'll be arguments on both sides. But in the meantime, I have no doubt that his defense team is already sort of hiving out an appeal team and saying, while we work on the sentencing side, you guys better start preparing the appeal because we're going to want to be ready for that.
CTV legal analyst Ed Prutschi helping to quarterback our coverage. Great to have you with us, Ed. Thank you.
You're welcome.